Part 2, Curse of the River Goddess, Emokpagbe's Cure. In Part 1 of this story, we saw how Emakpogbe was struck mute by his avenging stepmother turned Mami water, Igbagon. Emakpogbe wandered through the forest for several days, confused and disorientated. Eventually, he found his way home. The people could not believe that this gibbering, babbling wreck was the proud young man who had left the town a few weeks earlier. No one could understand what had happened to him. When Emokpagbe tried to speak, the only sounds that would come out of his mouth were grunts and forced, unintelligible, high-pitched croaks. He was unsteady on his feet and barely had control of his muscles, lapsing into uncontrollable shaking fits. Days passed, and Emokpagbe's condition still had not improved, to the increasing worry of his father, the Energy. Word was sent out. The Energy was determined to find someone to cure his son's condition. No cost was spared. Daily, an endless stream of juju priests, herbalists, faith healers, and physicians filed through the palace. Each offered some new miraculous cure. Each was confident that they had the remedy for Emokpagbe's condition. The Energy was desperate to try anything to cure his son. He would listen to the promises of obscure miracle workers and allow his hopes to be raised. But their failures pushed him lower down the dark tunnel of despair. For the first time in his life, the Energy felt completely out of control. He became increasingly dispirited. Stress etched deep lines in his face. His hair turned grey with worry. His eyes paled with sadness. He lost weight as he lost hope. Anxiety had made him less than a shadow of his former self. A long way away, in an obscure village, approached only after crossing 7 forests and 7 rivers, there was said to live a man who was fast gaining a reputation as an extraordinary physician, well-versed in the secrets of the supernatural. This man was the chief of Obo. His powers inspired fear and deep respect among all those who came across him. One day, Emokpolo, who was Emokpagbe's mother, approached her husband, the Energy, with news of the chief of Obo. Word had come to her about his powers, and after hearing about some of his deeds, she was justly impressed. She rushed to tell her husband of what she had heard. The Energy sat cross-legged on a mat in a corner of his room, muttering silent words of prayer. Emokpolo could not be sure if he had heard a word she had said, for not once did he look at her. As she knelt before her husband, it dawned on her just how much he had changed since Emokpagbe's illness. She took in his skinny, wasted limbs, his red-rimmed eyes sunken deep in their sockets, his grey, scraggly beard, which made him look so old and weak. It surprised Emokpolo that she had ever been afraid of this man. The Energy barely seemed to be aware of his wife's presence. Slowly, she stood up and left the room. Emokpolo was determined to protect her son's inheritance. Since a mute person could not be a ruler, that meant finding a cure no matter the cost. So she made the decision to make the terrifying journey to the land of the chief of Obo. Somehow she knew that he was their last hope. At the break of dawn, Emokpolo set off with Emokpagbe on the long journey that would take them across 7 forests and 7 rivers to the land of the chief of Obo. They made a strange sight. To fend off trouble, Emokpolo draped herself in rags and an odd assortment of clothes. She knew that people usually left alone those who were considered insane. Emokpagbe was dressed similarly, his jerking movements only serving to convince those people they came across that these were indeed 2 poor, mad people. The journey was long and slow. After 7 weeks, they reached the 7th forest. This forest was quite unlike any of the others that they had crossed. Its strange, ominous atmosphere was augmented by the absence of any living creatures. No birds called out to one another. No bush rats scrambled for food in the dense undergrowth. There were no antelopes or squirrels. No snakes slithered in the dirt. No flies danced around the travelers' faces. And as if that were not unsettling enough, Emokpolo noticed that the forest also had the strangest trees she had ever seen. They were tall and gnarled, and seemed to watch the strangers like jealous wives. As they went deeper, the forest grew denser and denser, as if closing up to form an impenetrable barrier. Eventually, the forest was so thick that the tops of the trees completely shut out the sunlight. Emokpolo knew she was close to the land of Obo, but her machete was no match for the thick, dense, thorny bush. When night fell, she made a bed of leaves for her son and sat beside him. Soon he fell asleep. Emokpolo looked around at the strange, mysterious forest. The night was dark. All around she could hear strange whispers and feel invisible eyes watching her. But fear no longer had any meaning for Emokpolo. Exhaustion overcame her and she fell asleep. She dreamed she was surrounded by spirits. Some carried her on their shoulders. Others parted the bushes. Then she dreamed she was sitting before the chief of Obo. She felt somebody shake her hand gently. Emokpolo opened her eyes and saw Emakpogbe kneeling before her.
"What is it?"
she cried in a sudden panic. Emakpogbe pointed to the bushes. Emokpolo stood up and looked on in amazement. Bushes and trees alike were bent almost double to expose a path. It was as if a pair of large invisible hands were holding the forest apart, inviting them to continue on their journey. A miracle had indeed happened. Emokpolo and Emakpogbe picked up their possessions and entered the deepest part of the forest. As they walked, the bushes before them continued to be mysteriously pulled apart, leaving the bushes behind them to close in again. Several days later, they had crossed the forest, and the invisible hand disappeared as mysteriously as it had come. Soon they began to pass settlements. Villagers took in the two strangers and their bizarre appearance. From the way the villagers stared and whispered amongst themselves, Emokpolo got the impression that they had been expected. When she stopped to ask the way, the villagers would silently point out the direction, while continuing to stare curiously and unblinkingly. The chief was an eccentric. He lived on the outskirts of Obo. His spies told him that strangers were looking for him. The chief did not like uninvited guests. In fact, he did not like guests at all. He wondered whether he should as a spell and kill the strangers before they even reached his home. Such was his power that it would only take a relatively simple spell. The chief decided that that would be too easy. He would amuse himself and turn them into the first creature that came to mind when he set eyes upon them. It was a punishment he often meted out on those who dared to annoy him. One could never tell if the goat eating silently in the yard, the cock crowing at dawn, or even the frog croaking a song in the pond was some hapless person who had been unlucky enough to feel the chief's wrath. The chief mischievously awaited the stranger's arrival. Meanwhile, Emokpagbe and Emokpolo journeyed on. Emokpolo was relieved that their journey was soon to end. They stopped by a stream. Both mother and son bathed in the cool, refreshing waters. Emokpolo removed from her pouch some black soap her grandmother had given to her. She remembered the old lady's instructions.
Only use this soap a few hours before you meet the chief of Obo, for its powers will soon wear off.
Her grandmother had never told her exactly what the soap was supposed to do, and Emokpolo had never asked. She felt refreshed for the first time in several weeks when she stepped out of the water. Humming contentedly to herself, she dressed. What she did not know was that the magic of the soap had already begun to work. Anyone else would have seen a woman dressed not in rags, but in the most radiant and glamorous robes. The chief was waiting to see the two ragged, dirty people his spies had told him had entered the village. He was not prepared for the sight that met his eyes. For the first time, his stony, cold heart fluttered as he took in Emokpolo's radiant beauty, emphasized by her exquisite garments. Before he could stop himself, the thought flitted through his mind that she looked like a royal princess. Emokpolo was not aware of what was going through the chief's mind. She went up to him and knelt politely in greeting. The chief stared down at her with his cold, beady eyes. Emokpolo hurriedly reached into her bag and brought out some kola nuts, a traditional gift offering which she humbly offered to the chief. The chief took in the nuts and looked from Emokpolo to Emokpagbe. He realized that he had lost. His honor dictated he would have to let them live. Now he was bored with them. The chief received the kola nuts ungraciously and called a messenger.
Escort them back to where they came from. See that no harm comes to them.
Emakpogbe said urgently.
Please, sir, we have come a long way. I know you can heal my son.
The chief began to walk away. The messenger stepped forward. Emakpogbe pushed him away and hurried after the chief. In a fit of desperation, she knelt before him and clung to his wrists.
Please do not send us away like this. Look at my son. Have pity on him. He grows weaker daily. If you don't help, no one can, and he will die.
The chief tried to ignore Emakpogbe, but she was persistent. Everywhere he went, she followed. Finally, he asked impatiently,
How do you know I could cure your son?
Because I know you can. You are the only one that can.
Emakpogbe replied simply. Flattery has been known to soften even the hardest of hearts, for people will always want praise. The chief was no exception. He was impressed at Emakpogbe's absolute faith in his powers. Slowly, he began to relent.
Let me look at the boy,
he said gruffly. At the expression of joy on her face, he quickly added,
I'm not promising anything.
Emakpogbe nodded quickly, but she knew she had won. And so, Emakpogbe left Emokpagbe behind with the chief. Her work done, she returned home with several escorts and many gifts. The chief began to try and cure Emokpagbe, but treatment was slow. Every morning and evening, the chief would pick a variety of herbs and roots from the forest. These he would mix into a liquid and give to the boy to drink. Slowly, strength returned to Emokpagbe's wasting limbs. Soon, he was strong enough to accompany the chief into the forest in the search for herbs. As they searched, the chief would point out to Emokpagbe the different plants, herbs, and roots. He would explain each of their healing properties. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The relationship between Emokpagbe and the chief strengthened. The chief came to look on the young man as the son he had never had. Emokpagbe learned to speak again. By the time he was healed, the bond between the two had so strengthened that Emokpagbe chose to remain with the chief, learning the secrets of nature and the mysteries of the supernatural. As time passed, the chief allowed Emokpagbe to know secrets he had never before shared with a living soul. 3 years went by. Emokpagbe had no desire to return home, but then he received a message from his father. The energy urged Emokpagbe to come home. He told his son that he had not many years left to live, and there were secrets that needed to be passed on. Emokpagbe knew then that he had been neglecting his duty. As the eldest son of an energy, it was his duty to be at his father's side, learning about the title he would one day inherit. Emokpagbe got the chief's consent and made immediate preparations to return home. The day arrived for Emokpagbe to leave. He had packed his things. It now only remained for him to say goodbye. Emokpagbe went looking for the chief. After searching for a while, he finally found his mentor sitting alone in his shrine.
Baba.
Emokpagbe called, standing at the door. The chief looked up slowly, creasing his face as if the effort hurt.
You are ready?
He asked. Emokpagbe nodded, stepping into the dark chamber.
I have come to thank you, Baba, for everything.
The chief took in Emokpagbe's soft, youthful features. He wondered if it were true what the oracle had just told him. But then, how could it not be? Had the oracle ever lied to him? He had received a warning not to let Emokpagbe leave the village alive, for if he were to do so, the young man would one day return to kill him.
Baba,
Emokpagbe called, innocent to the workings of the chief's mind.
Is something the matter?
The chief heard the voice, as if from a great distance. He looked up. The eyes that stared back into his were sincere. The chief then realized how much Emokpagbe had changed him. Once he would have not thought twice about cutting short Emokpagbe's life. After all, he had killed dozens in his time for far less. But Emokpagbe had touched the chief in a way that had never before happened to him. He knew then that he could not heed the words of the oracle. The chief stood up. He put an arm around Emokpagbe's shoulders and said,
"Come, my son. I will walk with you to the road."
Years passed. Emokpagbe resettled in his town. Eventually his father died and he became the energy. For the next few years he ruled the people wisely and well. He was a fine young man, well loved and admired by his subjects. Meanwhile, back in Obo, the chief came to terms with the absence of his beloved Emokpagbe. He reverted to his solitary lifestyle. As the years went by, he lapsed into his old ways. Quick to lose his temper, he was once more feared throughout the land. Without Emokpagbe's even temper and restraining influence, many hapless souls became the victims of the chief's wrath. One such victim was a young woman named Adesuwa. It was a day like any other, and the chief passed by a market as he journeyed from one town to another. He happened to see Adesuwa and became immediately attracted to her. Unknown to him, the Oba of Benin had also fallen in love with this beautiful young woman. Impulsively, the chief went over to talk to Adesuwa. Adesuwa might have been very beautiful, but she was also very tactless. She saw the middle-aged, unattractive man who stood before her, and she decided that she did not wish to talk to him. And in no uncertain terms, she told him so. The chief persisted, but Adesuwa got ruder and ruder. Eventually, the chief became so annoyed that he killed her. News of Adesuwa's death reached the Oba of Benin. He swore to avenge the death of the woman he loved. In those days, Benin was a strong and powerful empire. Villages for hundreds of miles outside the empire feared and respected the power of Benin. The Oba called his war chiefs and told them that he wanted the chief of Obo brought before him. Obo was a small, unimportant village, so the war chiefs felt that capturing its leader would pose no problems. An elder at the meeting tried to caution the overconfident chiefs but failed.
"I have heard the chief has powerful medicine. Our job might not be as simple as it seems,"
he said. The others scoffed. "Who is more powerful than the Oba of Benin?" they asked. And so it was reported back to the Oba that capturing the chief would be easy. The Benin war chief ordered his warriors to surround Obo. With a hand-picked group of fine young men, he marched on the village. To their surprise, they encountered no resistance. There were no signs of a defending army. Everything was calm, tranquil. The villagers hardly seemed to notice the strangers entering their land. The general and his men reached the chief's home. They found him tending his goats.
"In the name of the Oba of Benin, we come to arrest you to face trial for the murder of Adesuwa,"
the general told the chief as he prepared to give the order for his men to capture the chief. To the surprise of the army general, the chief's only reaction was a derisory laugh. The general then gave the order and soldiers stepped forward to arrest the chief. Then a strange thing happened. The chief blew a powdery substance in their faces. The men spluttered and coughed, trying to get the dust out of their eyes. Then, to the increasing amazement of all who stood there that afternoon, the soldiers slowly changed into dry brown leaves, which fluttered to the ground. A sudden gust of wind swept them up and blew them away. This can't be happening, the general thought as he ordered more of his men forward. Obediently, they ran toward the chief, only to meet with the same fate. The general found his well-armed army powerless in the face of the chief's amazing and mysterious powers. Finally, he admitted defeat and withdrew his remaining men. The Oba listened in annoyance and frustration as he heard how the chief had defeated his finest soldiers. The chief's powers had left the war chiefs confused and bewildered. They had no advice left to give the Oba, so he resorted to consulting the oracle. He was told that the only person who could kill the chief of Obo was a man called Emokpagbe.
"Who is this Emokpagbe?"
the Oba asked his advisors. He was informed that Emakpogbe was the Enoji of a village which had been conquered by Benin. The Oba had absolute power over every citizen in his kingdom. He immediately sent for Emakpogbe and ordered him to kill the chief of Obo. Emakpogbe knew that to refuse to carry out a direct order from the Oba meant instant death. But the chief was the last person Emakpogbe wanted to kill. What crime had his old mentor committed, he wondered. He knew the chief was quick to anger and impetuous in the extreme. Emakpogbe decided that he would go to Obo and have a long talk with the chief. Perhaps then they could work out what to do next. And so, Emakpogbe went back to Obo. He arrived to find the chief's compound deserted.
Baba,
He called as he made his way through the familiar grounds.
Baba, it is me, Emokpagbe.
Emakpogbe entered the house and walked through the rooms which had once been his home. Everything seemed to be as he had left it. In fact, it seemed as if he had never left. All the time he called out to the chief. No one answered. Emakpogbe entered the courtyard. It too was deserted. He walked further into the yard. Then he stopped, spinning round suddenly at the sound of a footfall. Emakpogbe found himself face to face with the chief of Obo.
What do you want, Imokpagbe?
The chief asked softly, his hand on his sword.
Baba, they sent me for you.
So this is how you repay me?
The chief replied, circling around Emakpogbe with a look of utter contempt.
I only came to talk, Baba.
Liar!
The chief spat at Emakpogbe, remembering the words of the oracle. If you let him go, he will one day return to kill you.
I know why you have come.
Baba, please listen to me.
Emakpogbe pleaded.
Never! You will have to kill me first!
The chief shouted, mad with rage. In one lightning movement, he whipped out his sword. The surface caught the sun and blinded Emakpogbe momentarily.
Do not let it come to this.
Emakpogbe pleaded, stepping back, out of the blinding glare of the sun's reflection. The chief held his sword before him and prepared to strike Emakpogbe. In a moment, Emakpogbe had drawn his sword. He parried with it, and the blade of the chief's sword caught the side of it, just missing Emakpogbe's head. The fight had begun. The two fought under the fierce glare of the blazing sun. It was a vicious fight that went on for several hours. Both were equally matched. Neither could gain the upper hand which each so desperately needed. The day wore on, and the fight continued. Feet kicked up the red, dusty earth which formed a haze around the fighters. The smell of the battle rose in the air as blood and sweat mingled. And then, as dusk approached, the chief took a fatal step backwards. His sandals caught on a stone. He lost his balance and fell, landing flat on his back. In a moment, Emakpogbe stood over him, sword raised in the air.
Kill me and you die. That is the curse of the gods.
The chief cried. Emakpogbe knew that if he allowed the chief to rise, he would kill him in an instant, so he lowered his sword and slashed at the chief, cutting off his head with a single stroke. Worn out from the fight, Emakpogbe decided to rest in Obo for a while before setting off for Benin, so he gave the head of the chief to a messenger. He told him to take it to the Oba of Benin, to show that the task had been successfully carried out. Obediently, the messenger took possession of the macabre object and hurried on to Benin. Once in Benin, the messenger gained an immediate audience with the Oba. He brought out the head.
Your Majesty, I have done as you ordered.
The Oba looked at the head. He was satisfied that it was indeed that of the chief. Pleased, he ordered the messenger to be well rewarded. A few days later, Emakpogbe arrived at Benin. As he made his way through the wide streets to the palace, he wondered at the cold welcome he received. There were no crowds, no welcoming party. Alone, he entered the palace. He was made to wait several hours before being granted an audience with the Oba, who did not seem particularly interested to see him.
Your Majesty, I have done as you ordered.
Who are you?
The Oba asked scornfully.
Emokpagbe, you ordered me to kill the chief of Obo.
Emakpogbe patiently explained.
Oh yes.
The Oba snorted.
Are you not a man, that you should run from the battlefield and allow your subordinates to carry out your tasks?
Emakpogbe was confused.
What? Your Majesty.
We were informed of the true story. Your messenger even said that when you heard that the chief was dead, you would come before me and try to take the glory. Begone, you lowly coward, before I have you killed.
The Oba cried. Emakpogbe left and returned to his town, bitterly wounded at the way he had been treated in Benin. He immediately banned all the women of his town from using the market at Benin. The Oba of Benin came to hear of Emakpogbe's ban and was furious. Who he thought was Emakpogbe to dare to divide his kingdom. Warriors were sent to capture Emakpogbe and kill him, and so it happened. Emakpogbe was killed within the year. His body was flung into the Igbagon River by the Benin soldiers. Time had healed the wounds of Igbagon, the troubled goddess of the waters, whose story is told in part one of this story, Curse of the River Goddess, Igbagon's Revenge. She received the body and made Emakpogbe immortal. Old men say that they live forever below the river to this day.
Middle.